Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Buthelezi, and I will be hosting this webinar today. So today's webinar is concerning a very, very pivotal discussion centered around the theme of closing the loop, zero waste, and food sovereignty. So as we all know, the current food system is plagued by inefficiencies and waste at every stage of the supply chain, from food production and distribution to consumption and disposal. Vast amounts of resources are squandered, contributing to environmental degradation and exacerbating food insecurity. Zero waste is a philosophy and a set of principles that aim to minimize waste generation and maximize resource recovery. It's about reimagining our relationship with consumption and production, moving away from the linear take, make, dispose model towards a circular economy where resources are conserved and reused. In the context of food systems, zero waste entails reducing food loss and waste throughout the entire value chain, from farm to fork. This includes strategies such as improving agricultural practices to minimize post-harvest losses, implementing efficient distribution and storage systems, and promoting sustainable consumption practices amongst consumers. But zero waste goes beyond just minimizing food waste. It's also about addressing the broader environmental and social impacts of our consumption patterns. It involves rethinking packaging and product design to minimize single-use plastics and other non-recyclable materials, advocating for extended producer responsibility, and supporting community-based initiatives for waste reduction and recycling. So today we're going to have two very, very interesting speakers, both Awande and Jani, who will talk about this topic. First up, we're going to have Awande Buthelezi, who's an organizer and researcher at the Cooperative and Policy Alternative Center. Awande is also an activist with the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign and the Climate Justice Charter movement. His dedication to advocating for food sovereignty and climate justice is truly inspiring, and we're honored to have him with us today. Our second presenter is Jani Swart-Van Biljoen, a passionate advocate for sustainable living with a particular focus on consumerism and waste. Jani's journey towards sustainability has led her to explore various avenues, from her academic pursuits and development studies to her hands-on work in the rural Eastern Cape. Her commitment to waste reduction and community engagement is evident in everything that she does, and we're delighted to have her insights on zero waste strategies. So each presenter is going to have 15 to 20 minutes to present, and then we'll open up the floor for any questions for the presenters. We'll start with Awande. Awande, I'm not sure if you're speaking yet, but we can't hear you. You're not audible at all. We still can't hear you.
Nothing.
Okay, we can hear you now. Hello? No, you just cut off again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my speaker's not good, so I just took out the headphones, but hopefully you can hear me now. I'm going to share my screen again. What I was saying is that the uh, want to go back. So today I'll be talking about zero waste and agroecology, the connection between the two, and why they are so perfectly balanced together. But before I begin, speaking more specifically on the state of waste within agro-industrial farming and agroecology, I'll begin by giving an overview on the state of waste, just to set an understanding with regards to why waste is such a huge problem. And then I'll go speak into climate inequality to connect that with the context of how the waste we generate is also contributed to and comes from the cycle of consumption, this treadmill of consumption, which our society finds itself within, but that is also quite an uneven picture when you look at it. Then from there, I will touch on biodiversity, commercial and agro-industrial waste, which comes out of this treadmill of consumption, before then finally touching on agroecology and zero waste and where they interact. So beginning with the state of waste, waste and the climate crisis are very intrinsically tied together. According to the World Bank and the UN and amongst others, each person on the planet generates an average of 0.74 kilograms of waste. The World Bank's data says that it's a range from 0.11 to 4.54 kilograms. So that's a clear distinction that not everyone contributes equally to the amount of waste being created, but there are some compared to others across society on a planetary scale who can contribute a overwhelming amount more in terms of the average waste that they produce in a day than others. In particular, high income countries produce more than a third of the 2 billion tons of global waste generated annually. So it's also an element of wealth and inequality that is becoming clear with regards to how and who is contributing to the generation of waste. The waste that we generate also has a number of other byproducts that come from it. And one of the worst ones is methane, which is the worst offender due to its higher potency than carbon dioxide, and also for its responsibility of up to 6% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So these are some stats and some context that we need to take into consideration when understanding how waste and how we approach waste with regards to our food system needs to be considered. Methane is also responsible for around 30% of the rise in global temperatures, since the Industrial Revolution began. You can see on this figure here, with regards to the sources of methane, obviously wetlands are high, but you can see agriculture also plays a huge role in the creation of methane, or rather the release of methane into the atmosphere. The waste sector is also responsible for about 20% of global methane emissions and around 3.3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's also important for us to understand that the way in which waste and agriculture come together, there is a relationship there that needs to be balanced out. But zero waste management methods also can help play a vital role in the way in which we come to grips with this. There's mitigation aspects to it, and there's adaptive ways in which zero waste can contribute to how we grapple with this, but there are also other additional societal benefits in the ways in which zero waste as a way of approaching this problem can contribute to us dealing with it effectively. So by restructuring our waste management systems to target these things, particularly products or byproducts such as methane, we can see that we can reduce these things by up to 13% just by restructuring our waste management system, not necessarily by overhauling it. And what we're speaking today about, and what this conversation is trying to guide, is a interrogation of, the complete restructure and transformation of how we approach these systems, not just restructuring them, So waste reduction solutions like segregation, composting, and recycling alone could reduce the sector's total emissions by 84%. So we're talking about the grand scale, effective, transformative reshaping of these systems. And it's indicating here in these figures that just simple recycling methods alone could help overwhelmingly contribute to how we deal with this. So at least 70% of these global emissions that we see coming from waste come from manufacturing, transport, and the use and disposal of goods. And this is the connection to our culture of consumerism and consumption that I was alluding to at the start. So a focus on reducing waste could significantly also help reduce the emissions in these sectors alone. So this is also the role in which waste and waste management can play in helping us deal with the climate crisis. Manufacturing goods, for example, or goods that are recycled from aluminium, 96% less energy than starting with raw materials. So there's also energy benefits with regards to how waste could help, or changes in waste management could help in dealing with some of the other inputs into the climate crisis. With regards to our country in particular, South Africa generates around 121 to 122 million tons of waste. As of 2017, it was 121, but newer figures show it's closer towards 122. And that's more than 52 million tons of that is hazardous waste. On average, 65% of general waste and 92.7% of this hazardous waste ends up in landfills. We don't have adequate ways of dealing with it. And 34.5% of general waste was recycled or recovered. So that's a increasingly low figure in comparison to how much of it ends up not being dealt with. Now, I think this is a good place for us then to go into the discussion around carbon inequality. As we spoke about in the first section, you could see that within the general state of waste and how waste is generated, at the human scale, there is a discrepancy between those who are responsible and the range with regards to how individuals contribute towards the state of waste. So with regards to understanding this at a greater scale, we have to look at it through the lens of carbon inequality. Using stats and data from an Oxfam study that looked at 1990 to 2015, very critical period within the context of rising global temperatures and emissions, where annual emissions grew by 60%. You can see that in this 25-year period, the richest 10% of the world's population, which is 630 million individuals, were responsible for 52% of total carbon emissions. So only 10% of the world's population is responsible for more than half of the total global carbon emissions. The poorest 50% in relation to them, or in comparison rather, 3.1 billion people only accounted for 7% of total emissions. So when we apply these metrics towards the state of waste, you start to see a different picture in terms of who's consuming and generating this waste that is contributing also to the climate crisis. The richest 1%, 63 million people alone, were responsible for 15% of total emissions. So it gets worse even as we narrow it down. Extrapolate out to the richest 5%, 350 million people being responsible for more than a third. So this picture also has an inverse with regards to how many of these resources are being consumed and used by these percentages across societies. So for the last 20 to 30 years that this problem has grown, our finite carbon budget has been used and spent to boost the consumption of the already wealthy. And these groups, or this group rather, has done this to the detriment of the poor and marginalized, but also future generations who are going to inherit this depleted carbon budget. So the picture that we're beginning to see is that this relationship between our need for consumption, but also our creation and production of waste from this state of affairs is also uneven across the board. So what is required of us in relation to reducing and keeping global temperatures below the 1.5 degrees Celsius target would require for the richest 1% carbon footprint, or the richest 1% per capita consumption footprint rather, which is 35% greater than the 2030 objective, to be reduced effectively. And that's also more than 100 times higher than the lowest 50%. So we have to bring these things into alignment. The richest 10% footprint is also 10 times that of the 1.5 degrees objective or marker, 30 times percent more than the poorest 50%. So it's also important for us to bring this consumption that is in line with these figures down. And in essence, dealing with that also means dealing with the waste that is produced by these groups. This picture, the global picture, which we've been speaking on, also when looked or turned towards South African society, follows a certain similar pattern. It's almost like a mirror, or that rather South African society is a mirror of the global state of affairs. So that also means that there's a necessity behind us dealing with carbon inequality within our country to be able to grasp and deal effectively with state of carbon inequality at a global scale. What you see in the South African picture is that the bottom 50% accounted for 11% of cumulative emissions. Compare that to the top 5% who accounted for 73%, and the top 1% whose emissions are 2 times higher than the top 1% in Europe. So even within the South African context, when we speak about us as a developing country, our responsibility and where do we stand in our importance, this state of inequality then begins to show a different picture where we do have a role to play, and fundamentally we do contribute a considerable amount to the picture of cumulative emissions on a global scale. So now, biodiversity, commercial and agriculture, agro-industrial waste, how that fits in within this picture of consumption and waste that I've been drawing with this first section. We require and survive off of the food which we consume within our society, but the state of affairs, or the way in which our agricultural system is structured and how this food is provided, is within this framework and within the structure of the treadmill of consumption. So when you look at the ways in which this also generates waste and its contribution to the climate crisis, as we spoke about in the previous section, it's really important for us to narrow it down and really think quite critically about how our commercial food system contributes to that state of affairs, which I've been speaking about. The UN estimates that 828 million people, were affected by hunger in 2021. But yearly, we see food losses of up to 1.6 billion tons of food wasted across the world, and 1.3 billion tons of that is edible. In South Africa in particular, of that 122 million tons of waste, which I spoke about at the start, 10 million tons of that is food waste, which goes to waste every year. So this is about a third of the 31 million tons that is produced annually in South Africa. Of that food waste, we see a huge proportion of it is vegetables and fruits. Grains also makes up a large number of that, then meats and other forms of food waste such as oil seeds and tubers. But a majority of this waste also happens at the retail and production level. This is also part of the greater framework of the commercial food system, not just from the level of the farm, but once it's been processed and brought to us in the commercial retail centers. In addition to this, it's also important for us to understand that to provide this structure and to provide this framework of the commercial food system, which we currently exist on, a huge amount of that is also impacting land usage and has its own impact on biodiversity. 122.3 million hectares of land in this country, and of that, 100.6 million hectares of farmland is made up of that. That's 83% of it going mainly to grazing, 16.7 million hectares considered potential for arable land. So that's a huge kind of a usage just going to one sector or one particular thing within our larger framework of the agricultural system. 1.35 million hectares of this country's potential arable land is used for irrigation. That's more than a third of the total output in the agricultural sector. Only 12% of the country's land is suitable for production of rain-fed crops. So there's also unfavorable climatic and soil conditions that are being created by the state of affairs. 3% considered genuinely fertile land. whilst also considering the fact that we live in a semi-arid country. This cannot necessarily continue in the long term when taking into account the effects of the climate crisis. When you look at the impact this has had on biodiversity and species lost, on the National Red List, you see 10% of birds and frogs being there, 20% of mammals, and 30% of plants are also threatened by this general state of affairs. There's other things that we have to consider with regards to how agro-industrial farming contributes to this picture that we're drawing right now with regards to waste, but also its impact on biodiversity. A lot of the waste that we see being generated is an edible material, which is a huge problem with our ability to deal with that in creating zero waste loops. As a result, various agricultural and industrial operations also rely on and include slaughterhouses. It's the waste that comes from that, meat processing, animal dung or manure, things that we need to take in consideration, field crop wastes, crop residues, harvest wastes, and waste from food consumption and processing are some of the main things we have to grapple with when thinking about agro-industrial waste. This is just a picture with regards to how we can divide that and think around it. The agricultural residues from the production of agricultural goods, and then its transference into food processing waste, whilst we're moving up that conveyor belt of from the farm to the retail centers. This is some of the other waste that is generated and must be contended with. So to give a more clearer picture on how we can think around it and apply our minds towards the ways in which zero waste can help us in tackling this, and how agroecology can also help us in tackling this. We can broadly divide it into recyclable and compostable waste that is produced from these farms, non-recyclable and non-compostable waste, and then hazardous agricultural, agro-industrial waste also. The compostable waste obviously speaks to material, plant and organic matter that can be recycled and processed at recycling plants, can be fed back into the agricultural process. Non-recyclable agro-industrial wastes that come from various operations within farms like construction, mechanization, transportation, and livestock protection facilities. These ones have their own kind of challenges, particularly the ways in which a lot of this waste material is bulky and is not reused or recycled on the farm, and the ways in which these processes or farms are structured makes it difficult for them to be reusable in their current forms. And then hazardous waste or hazardous agro-industrial waste is also very serious in terms of the threat that it poses. And it's a huge problem if not managed correctly, as is the case in a number of instances. So in addition to this, when thinking around agri-industrial systems and the waste that's produced from it, and also its effects on increasing biodiversity loss, we have to also take into consideration other points of contention that the current system of agro-industrial agriculture presents us with. Land usage or reusage, biodiversity loss, as we've spoken about. Do we have to consider the ways in which we can limit or stop the expansion of land to help protect biodiversity? Restoring ecosystems on farms, that's a new challenge also in light of minimizing this encroachment. Urban sprawl and the greater impact of increasing suburbanization, urbanization, and how that also contributes to this demand from the sector, and the ways in which curbing and tackling this problem of agro-industrial agriculture requires us also to put a mind towards how we approach and confront commercial food systems and the waste that is created in that sector at scale. Finally, just to end off, agroecology and zero waste and its divergence from agro-industrial agriculture. Agroecology in and of itself as a methodology is holistic, and it's a practice which also focuses on movements and a grassroots approach, but also ties that towards the ecologically sustainable and also creating food systems that is embedded within communities and society at large. In and of itself, it promotes zero waste in the way in which agroecological methods of food production are structured. It's non-toxic, so it reduces the required reliability on us to think and manage hazardous waste. It ensures and emboldens food sovereignty. It empowers smallholders to be more productive. It helps in conserving water, and it builds healthy soil and is resilient in its diversity. So that in and of itself means that there is a number of ways in which it can lend itself more greatly in helping us create zero waste food hubs or zero waste farms, which tackle some of the other non-recyclable and hazardous waste materials that are being created from the agro-industrial food system. Agroecological methods and approaches also conducive in helping us do this through the way in which organic matter and organic material is the primary waste material that is created from the agroecological method of growing food. So there's a number of capabilities that allows in initially helping us create these zero waste loops in our food system, but the easy and accessible one for most people to understand, for example, would be composting. Waste in and of itself, as we understand it, is made and generated from our processes, our economic and societal processes. It does not exist in nature in the way that we understand it or speak of it. So moving towards and practicing agroecological methods helps us then in creating and closing this loop of human-made waste and effectively removing agriculture from that societal contributor towards emissions if we move at scale towards this method of growing and producing food. So the ways in which agroecology seeks to create ecologically sustainable methods and ways of growing food lends itself towards this imitation of natural ecosystem in the ways in which its processes recycle nutrients, use biomass, preserve water within its systems, and increase resource use, efficiency, and minimization of waste. It lends itself towards being an agricultural component of a larger societal strategy of zero waste. And then finally, the zero waste loops within these processes can take place at the farm, larger scale of medium scale, small scale farmers, but also across different landscapes. So for example, the diversity of different methods and their connections with a zero waste approach, with, for example, agroforestry, you can see systems that include deep rooting trees to help capture the nutrients that have been lost through the roots of annual crops, crop livestock systems that can help promote recycling of organic materials, such as manure for composting, nutrient cycling, which can help 51% of the economic value of non-provisioning ecosystem services by integrating livestock, can help us in providing this and facilitating this more effectively. Another example is rice fish farm systems as a way in which the aquatic animals can help fertilize crops. So these are just examples of a range of different agroecological methods and how they can innovatively help us in understanding and reducing the ways in which waste and agricultural waste contribution towards emissions can be greatly reduced. And then when you connect this with food sovereignty at large and how as a system and as a concept helps us to move away from the commercial food system, then there is a additional kind of multiplier effect in helping us further reduce the ways in which food and agricultural systems can contribute towards decreasing emissions by effectively removing this generation of waste. I think I've gone over time, so I will end over here.
Thank you, Awande. We're now going to move over to Jani, and then once she's done, we'll open the floor up for questions.
All right. Let's see. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Jani, and I'm going to share a little bit more from the consumer point of view. I think this was an excellent presentation, Awande, and a really good introduction. So I don't have to cover all the big fancy numbers. Let's get into it. So I want to cover a few things today, where we find ourselves with regards to waste and food security. What do we want to see in terms of a change in those areas? How I understand zero waste. I already gave a very good introduction, but I'll maybe mention some other points. And then how I see zero waste being linked to food sovereignty, especially on the more consumer level. And then I also want to share two cool examples with you, how I think, this can actually play out sort of quite easily. All right, so in terms of consumer waste and food security, Awande already gave some really cool stats about the state of waste in South Africa. But to recap some of it, in terms of organic waste, it is the highest tonnages of all the waste in South Africa. Only about, actually less than 50% is recovered or composted. And this includes all the industrial waste. Some of it not actually included if it's composted at farms. About 30% of municipal waste is organic. This might include the garden waste. Then I think a number a lot of us know well is that about more than a third of food is wasted. South Africa is also sort of known, like many other countries, as a country that is highly dependent on landfilling for our waste management. And like Awande also pointed out, it's quite problematic, especially with the methane emissions that come from landfilling when it contains so much organic waste, about 50%. So actually in the South African National Waste Management Strategy, they're advocating for committing to a more circular economy or circular model for how we go about our waste and managing our waste, because of this massive problem of landfilling and limited airspace. In some reports, it said that the city of Cape Town, the city of Johannesburg, they had less than 10 years left on their landfills. And with 50% of organic waste still going to landfills, and organic waste being this massive portion of our total waste bucket, it's actually sort of the starting point that they want to address, is that we should get organic waste out of landfills. And for that, there's obviously a couple of what's the word? Strategies to do that. I also want to touch on food security or insecurity, because we're talking about food sovereignty. There's also maybe numbers that many of you are familiar with. But just a quick overview is that about a quarter of South Africans live under the food poverty line. They sort of estimate that as like 760 Rand per month that you need for food. That 27% of children under 5 years old are stunted, which means they didn't grow properly because they didn't have a good diet. And that severe acute malnutrition is a leading cause of death for children under 5 in South Africa. So people don't have enough food to eat. Even when they do have enough money or food to eat, it is often not as nutritious as it should be. Those numbers in South Africa are actually even more shocking. The Pietermaritzburg, this is now Justice and Dignity Group, PMEJD, they estimate that if a child would actually eat a nutritious diet, their grocery basket or whatever would cost about 950 Rand per month, whereas the child grant, support grant, is now just over the 500 Rand per month. So this just gives a little bit of an idea that in one sense, people don't have enough to eat, but they also don't have enough nutritious, good quality food to eat. In another sense, I wanted to just say sort of where we've gotten as a society. I luckily don't see this in South Africa often, but it is one of my favorite memes from the internet. You'll just see that picture on the right, where someone says, if only nature would find a way to cover these oranges so we didn't need to waste so much plastic on them. Yeah, that says enough. I wanted to share one example as well about this food insecurity or nutritious insecurity. I have the opportunity to live here in the rural Eastern Cape at the moment. And this is sort of a picture of what is close to us here. You'll see obviously that there is no proper waste removal. People have to often burn waste in their backyards, strewn all over the pathways, quite an eyesore. And I just realized again this week, walking to the spaza shop across from us, if you want to buy a snack, it's literally cheaper to buy Go Slow packet of chips, either for a 1 Rand or for an 8 Rand, than it is to buy a fruit. And so often you see it also with people walking around here, or the kids especially. Parents would just buy them a 1 Rand packet of chips, and that's sort of what they have for lunchtime or tea time. Instead of eating a healthy banana or an apple, because it is literally more expensive. I think that also sort of says something about people's access to healthy food and the cost of it. Right. So what do we want to see? Instead of, in the case of waste, a redesign of the supply chain and the system, so that there is less waste. We also want to see a diversion of organic waste from landfills into composting, especially. And then we also want to see people eating more local, whole, healthy, nutritious foods with less packaging. Again, sort of taking this rural context, for example, where there isn't good waste removal, you want to sort of eliminate that challenge of packaging. Then in terms of food security, we want to see better access to nutritious whole foods. We want to see more participation in food production, which could actually mean more security, because people that wouldn't necessarily need cash to have a bite. And then we want to see a change in ownership and behavior also from people on the ground, also in terms of food sovereignty. So quickly about zero waste. I know we have spoken about this, but maybe just sort of to define how I see it, is that it is about the prevention of waste, not just the management of it. And we want to see that through the redesign of the system. So we want to redesign the value chain sort of so that there's less waste, either like to have less packaging. We want to see better distribution, so to prioritize local, to link people up better. Want to see things better repairable, want to see them be recovered and recycled better. This is, of course, for all types of waste. But I know for the purpose of this webinar, might focus a little bit more on organic waste, which is actually perfect because it's such an easy starting point also to establish zero waste systems. So essentially we aim to close the loop. It is a regenerative system. It is concerned with responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery. It says that we're not supposed to burn or discharge anything to the environment except organic waste we can compost. Whatever we do with waste, it shouldn't threaten animal or human health. And we also want to prioritize low-tech, low-cost, local sharing type of models, which also then speaks to this challenging this idea of ownership of the commons, and and of ordinary items, actually. And in that way, it's also sort of linked to the solidarity economy, which we'll also get to now when we look at some examples. So how do I see zero waste linked with food sovereignty? I think the first thing is that both are concerned with the dignity and health of spaces and communities. If we think about landfilling, again, such a prominent example of how it is not good for communities living nearby. We want to see an end to that. That is the whole thing of zero waste to landfill as well. We want to see more dignities and health for those communities. We also want to see communities take more charge, which also sort of adds to this whole thing of dignity. It's also concerned with local and social small-scale solutions, which is very cool, and that will also, again, come out in the two examples that I want to share with you. Then the other big thing is the production and the consumption of whole nutritious foods. One reason, because there's fewer or less different packaging involved. Again, if you take my example of the packet of chips versus a banana or an apple, it's completely different. Even if you're also in the supermarket, you'll notice, even though fruits and vegetables would be in a plastic bag or be in some sort of container, it's quite different than other types of foods that need to stay on a shelf for many months or years to come. There's also then obviously the benefit of composting in the case of whole and nutritious foods, organic foods, if any of them had to go to waste, or the peels, the packaging, in a sense, natural packaging of those foods. Yes, and then the last thing, like Awande also elaborated, the agroecology and the permaculture. So just made this little cycle here, I imagine, for smaller communities, or even from household to household. If we could compost more, we can have better soil health. We will have better yields and more nutritious food. The more yields we have, the more we can share, which would also sort of add to the sustainability of a more local food production. And in that way, we can actually get more participants who can then also add to the cycle. This might make a little bit more sense when I explain my example just now. So the two examples I want to share with you, the one is one of my favorite examples. I tell it to all my friends and family, so I was very stoked that I could share it with you now as well. The one about the chickens, and then the one on the right is a case study of a fresh produce market in Durban in the inner city, which I will get to now. So the chicken one, which is quite cool, and I feel like this could be such an easy implemented project for rural areas, for areas just outside cities, even in cities, especially in South Africa, where many people have big backyards. So this comes from an initiative they actually had in Belgium. I see that France has also introduced it recently. And it basically is that they had such a massive problem with their waste removal, their landfilling, and especially just like South Africa, with the organic waste, and how that, what's the word I'm looking for? Like spoiled all the other materials that could have been recycled. It's super heavy to transport. And again, the methane emissions and all of that from landfilling. So they wanted to reduce that. So this town, well, actually a few towns now in Belgium and France, like I mentioned, offered people chickens, 2 or 3 chickens, hens, and anyone who wanted to participate could put up their hands. They received some education, and the only thing was that they weren't allowed to kill the bird within 2 years or give it away. And they saw that there was a massive reduction in the waste that was sent to landfill because the chickens would eat people's kitchen scraps. People obviously also found a lot of joy from having chickens. I haven't had chickens myself, but I intend to do so in the future. Yeah, people also reported that when they had chickens and their neighbors didn't, they would actually ask their neighbors to send their kitchen scraps so that the chickens could have enough to eat, and they could then exchange the chicken eggs again with their neighbors. So it actually created this sense of connection. It actually also made people a lot more cognizant of the food that they waste because they could now see where it is going. And I guess you can also argue that ideally people would waste less food, which would mean less food for the chickens, which is sort of part of the goal. But then again, also this joy that it gave people, and that they had more control over at least then the eggs that they could eat, which is a very healthy form of protein and nutrition. Yeah, and it is clean food. You know what that chicken ate and where that egg came from. Yeah, so that's a really cool example of giving people sort of control over the food in their backyard, and also at the same time reducing, well, I guess not food waste, but at least then waste that would have gone to a landfill. Yeah, and all of the consequences of that. There's one statistic that was also mentioned with this. I couldn't actually find backing for it really quickly, but it said that if every third household in America would have chickens in their backyard, there basically wouldn't be an egg industry in America. And I hope that is true because it does demonstrate how these small interventions on a small scale in a household, in communities, how it can actually have a massive effect on food security and, yeah, on giving people back control over what they eat. The other example then is this inner city market in Durban. So some of you might have been there, the Warwick market. And this was actually a research or a study done by a couple of partners, university and NGOs and everyone. And so there's this fresh food market. It's open early in the morning. It's usually street vendors that would go there and purchase produce that they then sell on a street corner somewhere in the city. But they obviously found that a lot of these food items would go off really quickly. And then the sellers in this bigger market would just throw it in a bin. And so this research group actually then started diverting this organic waste to be composted. So the landfill where it was taken for years was about 20 kilometers away. And they managed to divert it to be composted at the nearby botanical gardens, which was 1.5 kilometers away. So massive difference in where it had to be transported and what would happen with it afterwards. They actually managed just from this market, and I've been there, it is big, but it's also not the biggest market I've been at. They managed to actually divert about 7.5 tons of organic waste per week, which could equal up to 400 tons per year. So they would actually take it to the botanical gardens. You can see it on the picture there at the bottom. They would mix it with some of the organic waste from the botanical gardens, leaves and grass cuttings, and make these piles of compost. You'll see also there in the right top corner, the picture of the seedling. So that's also at the market. It wasn't actually linked to this composting initiative, but being there, I can just imagine what this could actually mean for other markets in rural areas. in little towns or then in the inner city, where you would have markets where people can bring the produce that they have from their own gardens or from their small farms, where they can sell it, where if things aren't sold, obviously you don't want food waste. But if anything couldn't be distributed quickly enough and there were some food waste, that it would be composted. There's also the opportunity that if you have a market like that, consumers who come by there, if they can't compost or they're not feeling really keen to compost in their backyard, or they live in an apartment where they can't, that they can bring their organic waste back to this market, to the sellers, to the small scale farmers, where they can then compost it on their land. This also gives the opportunity, like in that picture, for seedling production from good quality soil. Yeah, I think it seems so easy and replicable in so many various places, how we can link the farmer or the producer with the consumer, and also then the at least organic waste that doesn't actually go to waste but is put to good use, goes back into the soil, and becomes food again. Yeah, I think I will stop there.
Thank you, Jani, and thank you, Awande. I'd like to now open the floor up to any questions. You can raise your hand or you can leave your questions in the chat. I see 2 hands. Bonke, you can go first. Hi, can you hear us?
It's me.
Yes, you can go.
I'm not Awande. I'm not Awande. It's in Buthelezi.
It's perfectly fine. You can go.
Okay, thank you. This waste is a reality, and it is contaminating the soil a lot because of what covers it when it goes to waste. And also the children, if we still have the children who are not getting the nutritional quality food, but there is a lot of waste. My question is, because we are many organizations and it has been long we are working, what is that way we can be listened, which we can do to reverse this? Looking at the policies that are there for the health of the children and the environmental policies for contaminating the soil. Because if you go to towns, even in a rural area, because in South Africa, waste is collected, even in rural area nowadays. And if you go there, there is a lot of waste of what covers the leftovers. I understand we're doing the deeper work, but what is that which all of us can do to bring the attention of these industries which produce food which people cannot finish, they easily rot, And also what covers those food is going to be the waste, even this food also. And the impact is much on the children.
Thank you, Mphatheleni, for that question. I think either Jani or Awande can take it. Awande, you're still muted.
I'll go first if that's okay. I think that you made a particular point when you asked about, you know, the fact that we exist in a number of organizations, and there's a lot of work that's being done around this issue, but how can we be heard? And for me, my answer is to say that we need to come around and build new institutions that can help to direct and make sure that this work gets taken forward. As Chloe said at the start, I am an activist with the Climate Justice Charter movement. So we're currently developing a zero waste and simple living policy, speaking on this issue, bringing together all these different research and policies and experiences that touch on this. But we're not just working on waste. We have a rights of nature policy, and we have other policies on the work. And as a movement, we're looking to interact and link up with people such as yourself and to bring together all these grassroots organizers, activists, and groups that are fighting this fight, so that we can, you know, link hands and have that strength in numbers. But also looking at the ways in which these policies can be implemented from the ground up, not just from the top down. How do these strategies of zero waste and food sovereignty that deal with these issues like what you were speaking about with regards to nutrition being a problem and how communities are impacted by this? We're looking at the ways in which you know, these policies can be implemented from the grassroots level, how you can implement them in your community, how as a worker you could implement it in your workplace, not just at the level of national government. So I think that's important for us to also keep that perspective, and that we need to find ways of being able to initiate these changes from where we are. And then with the right kind of political leadership, they can meet the people where the people already are. But obviously that's not necessarily an easy task. And I think this webinar and these conversations are part of that process of kind of trying to bring us together to facilitate not just the thinking around this issue, but also help us to move towards a place where we can really connect with each other to get these things done.
Thank you, Awande. I'm not sure whether Jani would like to answer that question as well.
Yeah, I think the only comment I have is, I guess, around the children and the nutrition. There's definitely a lot of education that needs to happen, and it would come from a lot of places. I'm thinking about the DG Murray Trust. So that's one organization that's advocating a lot, especially for children's nutrition. They're actually advocating for a list of 10 food items that they say shouldn't be taxed or shouldn't generate profit, to make sure that families and especially children can have a nutritious meal. But I think with that and what they are doing is a lot of education also with parents and communities. And it is, I mean, we're all aware of it, that the packet of chips or the sweets, the lollipop, it is nicer to eat because of the sugar and the MSGs than it is to eat a fruit or a vegetable. But I think if people would, well, I guess that's what food sovereignty is also about in essence, is educating people and helping people take more ownership of their food and of what they put in their bodies. making sure that it is nutritious and it is beneficial to them.
Thank you for that, Jani. I'm not sure if Wonke still has a question, or should we move on to some of the questions in the chat? Okay, I think I'll move on to the questions in the chat. So Vish asked, Awande, what about waste going into the oceans and compromising it as a food source? How do we ensure zero waste for our oceans?
That's a good question. I think it also ties to another question that Charles spoke about, but I'm not going to answer both. But the reason I say it ties to that is about the way in which we accurately measure and quantify waste that's being produced and where it's being produced from. In our government's national waste management strategy, the most recent one that they released in the past 3 years, one of the things that they cite in terms of the difficulty that they have in challenge of waste management is the inaccurate or the lack of accurate information around the waste streams that are being generated. Not just an inability to measure that waste, but the understanding that the waste is also there's an accumulation in waste generation due to demographic factors of just our society growing from population, but also the increase in human activity that goes along with economic activity and seeking economic growth. So in particular, when it comes to ensuring that zero waste can help protect our oceans, or that we can also just minimize the amount of waste that's compromising the oceans as a food source, but also as a space of biodiversity, that begins then with an accurate accounting of the waste that's going into that. So some of it is quite easy in terms of off the top, industrial processes that take place near the ocean, the kind of industrial material and waste that is polluting our oceans, for example, refineries and other industries of that nature, that would be more easier for us to kind of account for and tackle because that waste is quite easy to zero down given how large scale those processes are and are easy to see and account for. But the greater challenge, I would say, in terms of whilst creating these zero waste frameworks to protect our ocean, is the waste that is produced upstream from rivers and the tributaries that feed into our ocean. How do we manage plastic waste that comes down from the ocean? How do we manage inorganic and organic waste that is coming down our rivers into our oceans? So I would say that the way in which we target and look at zero waste strategies for protecting our oceans need to have both a coastal aspect in terms of targeting the industries and processes that are directly contributing to that waste along our shoreline, but also an inland strategy of dealing with effectively all the various forms of waste that are produced and then flow and contributes to our shore ocean. So I would say that we need that kind of dual strategy that can feed into each other as a more holistic kind of ocean waste strategy. An example of that, that I would throw also is just simply the banning of single-use plastics along coastal provinces, as an example, and then finding other ways of tying that to the limitations of those kind of materials furthermore inland. So we marry the two in those kind of ways. But there's low-hanging fruit, for example, completely removing certain materials that we use quite prominently commercially across all coastal regions and communities, and then finding ways for that to feed back into inland communities. It would be an example of the low-hanging fruits, and then creating a more comprehensive strategy that feed into that foundation that we've set with that.
Thank you, Awande. We had Kate who also had a question. Her hand is raised. I'm not sure if Kate can.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I'm getting used to the Zoom conference setup. First, I just wanted to say thank you both so much for such interesting and informative presentations. Yeah, it's interesting to see the big picture and the numbers. And I work teaching agroecology, and so I really love the idea of diverting all this, what I like to say, so-called waste, so compostable waste, from farms to and especially from retail into compost, because I think sometimes it's easy for us to assume that farmers are producing waste, but I think generally if their waste is compostable and usable, they will apply it back onto their fields and they will use it themselves. And I think a lot of small scale producers will do the same thing. So I think it's important that the statistics we look at also show what quality of organic waste is going to landfill, because sometimes it's because it's too high in nitrogen or too high in hormones or too high in other elements that are, or heavy metals even, that the farmers don't want to put it back into their soils. So those were just things that more like a comment that came up for me. But on a personal experiential level, I love, and I'm very passionate about this idea of, you know, it's the government that's supposedly responsible for removal of waste, and where they have a big expense. I know in our municipality, I think it's like 22 million tons a year or something crazy that goes to landfill. And then we have a big green waste dump. And for me, it's a very obvious connecting is to bring those two together, to remove the methane-rich food waste that's going to landfill from that, and then combine it with the green waste dump. And I've really struggled to close that loop working with my local municipality. And so I tried from the top, leveraging down, and moving down towards a compost system that could go into food gardens. And then I'm seeing now maybe the other direction is to set up the food gardens, which we've also got, and demand the compost from the municipality. And my question is whether any of examples of such a case study, or has there been a case where a local municipality has managed to collaborate and coordinate with local food growers to do such a thing? You know, I understand in your like brilliant example with the botanical garden and the market, but I think this is kind of avoiding the municipality's engagement. Or I'm not sure if they still helped with the food removal or not. But yeah, I'm wondering if there's any such examples where there is like a successful, where we can show that the municipality saved money by doing that, and nutritional local food was grown and distributed to creches or soup kitchens, or even better, to local markets. Yeah, so that's my question for either of you. Thank you.
Maybe I can jump in on this one. Very interesting, Kate. Thank you for saying that. On the market botanical garden example, yeah, unfortunately this was a bit of a pilot. So they actually used the botanical garden to transport with their bakkies this organic waste. But there was the idea that in the future, the municipality would actually get involved, even if it is then in the sense of using the compost that was generated to use throughout the city, in the gardens or the parks, all of that. But I guess you're right, there was maybe a little bit of this thing of trying not to be too reliant on them. I wish I had more details for you. I'm not sure actually where you're based in the country, but the Western Cape has done quite a bit on this, especially because, like I mentioned, the landfill airspace is really running out. So they've done a lot. I think, yeah, some number I saw was like 22,000 households or something that received different bins so that they could separate their waste at home, and that they really wanted to get going with composting. And there were some examples of smaller towns and initiatives where they wanted to partner with the community gardens or organizations yeah, to actually link this up. So I can maybe send you more information. I know where I've read it. I just don't have it in my mind at the moment. But so there is hope.
Thanks, Jani. We also have another question from you in the chat from Angela. She says, great presentations. Thank you so much. Jani, I would love to hear if you have any more specifically local, rural Eastern Cape examples, initiatives. I see a lot of community projects and school gardens where food scraps, veggie scraps get used for the community pigs, which is a great use, but there is no cognizance of anything going back into the garden system, i.e. the pig's manure being used.
Yeah, pigs are another favorite for sure, because you need so little space for them. Yeah, but good question, Angela. I wish I had more examples of in the bigger rural Eastern Cape, especially sort of where this food sovereignty thing link up with zero waste. Fortunately, the only thing I've really seen now, it seems like in a way it's like an obvious starting point with this like more awareness around waste and recycling is with waste pickers. So especially like where we are now, maybe I'll say like in a 100-kilometer radius, there are some initiatives popping up now, but it is, like I said, more for recycling of plastics and glass and paper, and then working with or sort of establishing actually some waste pickers based in the communities. So that's actually really cool, but I haven't seen a link yet with like the food waste or food production. One opportunity I think there is, but this is sort of placing it again in the hands of the government, or hopefully in partnership with the government, because I see that's one way that the government is sort of, yeah, like really getting into like really rural communities is through the extended public works program. At the moment, they employ people in really rural areas to help with waste picking, in a way, waste removal for a few months a year. So yeah, to employ people, give some employment at least for a few months a year. And it's not very impressive at all, but it is a way actually to educate them and to reach into those rural communities. So I know of a really cool NGO around here who actually is sort of a link for the government on that program into their village, and they're actually now looking for opportunities to utilize that group of people more to get them into waste picking so that their income is supplemented a little bit, and also to provide them with more education around waste management and recycling and all of that. So that's maybe a cool in, but unfortunately I haven't seen like much progress on it.
Thank you for that, Jani. We also have another question from Charles. Thanks, Jani and Awande, very informative presentations. And his question is food waste being accurately measured and quantified, especially in the hospitality and food service sectors? Are there standardized methods, or do we rely on self-reported data? I think either one of you can take that. Awande, your sound is gone again.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I did briefly touch on the fact that in the government's National Waste Management Strategy of 2020, they cited this as one of the key priorities in trying to overturn their inability to accurately measure and quantify waste. But at the level of the retail sector, I'm not as well versed in the hospitality, but I know that in the retail sector and the food services sector is connected to retail, that a lot of shopping complexes and malls within their structures might have some measure of the waste being generated, but there is a lot of self-reporting happening and self-management. There are some communities in Joburg where people have gotten into initiatives of approaching a spa or a restaurant within the area to try deal for mainly entrepreneurial reasons with the waste that stems from that. But I'm not as familiar with national level systems of managing and methodology of reporting that has fed into all kind of commercial retail operations like shopping centers and malls.
Thank you, Awande, for that. So I think we have time for like one more question, but if not, I'm happy to close the session. Okay, so we've got another question from Charles. How do ultra-processed foods contribute to food waste? I am thinking in terms of producing, distributing, and disposing, etc.
I'm wondering if I should take this, even though I don't feel so confident to answer this. I don't know, maybe Kate could actually tell us what would happen with these things when they go into a compost heap or into a landfill. But yeah, this is an interesting question, because I sort of came up as a question for myself around the zero waste food sovereignty thing, because in a way the food that we eat that are commercially grown, they do tend to last a little bit longer than organic grown food, which is sort of sad because, well, in a way, obviously, we don't want food to go to waste and go off easily or rot, but we also want good quality food. So this ultra processed foods, I guess in a way you could say, yeah, they contribute less to food waste, but in a way they do contribute a lot then to other types of waste in terms of plastic and packaging and all of that. And I wonder if you have some other ideas.
Yeah, I wanted to say that going back to the different broad categories of waste that is produced from agro-industrial agriculture, but also where it connects to the commercial food industry, particularly with regards to non-recyclable, non-compostable waste and hazardous waste material. Ultra-processed foods would contribute more to those kinds of waste material, particularly taking into consideration some of the chemical processes that are required for ultra-processed food, the packaging processes for ultra-processed food. I mean, most processed and ultra-processed foods comes in, plastic and other forms of packaging that is required for the kind of food material that it is. Then there's also edible and non-edible oil wastes that are also produced from it. A lot of processed foods also require palm oils, canola oils, and other forms of oils in their mixtures, particularly if you're looking at sauces and other cooked food that you'll find if you go to your shopping center and you read through the ingredients. And then finally, the hazardous waste being contributed from some of the other chemical byproducts of the additives and other chemicals and ingredients that are added to these processed foods to allow them to last longer. So that's some of the challenge that you'll get with the waste that is being generated by these ultra-processed foods. Hence why the organic aspect of agroecological production, the foods that are being produced from agroecological methods, lend themselves towards eliminating some of that, not just in the method of growing food, but the kind of food that you're producing also, in minimizing some of those byproducts that you get from ultra-processed foods.
Okay. So we have one reflection from Kate, and then I'm going to end with one question from Buthelezi. So Kate is saying, I think we need to redefine food. Highly processed foods often have long-term medical impacts, such as diabetes, etc. If it cannot be digested well in our gut, it cannot be composted well either through the earth's gut. And then in Butheleni's question, can we have a way forward that's proposed as expectations on how do we raise a voice, or what can be done to start to engage with each other as a mass movement in order to have another system of communicating these challenges? Either one of you can take this.
I'll go quickly. As I said before, we are developing zero waste and simple living policy. That's also in line with a rights of nature policy that we've released and been circulating, and also a food sovereignty policy. So please do engage with these. We also will be having different events of this nature in which we present and seek engagement of these on these policies also. That's kind of help also just coalesce some of these ideas that we're speaking about into a more comprehensive way of how do we tackle them at a societal level at scale. Because today we're speaking in particular with regards to our food system, but then there's also other connections and how this expands beyond that. And I think that to tackle something holistically, we have to go right at the source, and that's speaking at this cycle and structure that is created and has put food within the system that not only contributes this waste, but also incentivizes it financially. And that's what we're trying to get the heart at, but also providing solutions of how in your community and where you are, you can also approach and try to deal with it at a level that's appropriate to that.
Thank you for that, Awande. So I think we've run out of time, and I'd like to close the session. Thank you so much to Jani and Awande for this very, very informative webinar, and we're very excited to see what you guys do in your future in this space. Thank you for everyone also who showed up today, and for all of your questions. They helped to really deepen the conversation. Thank you.